This is going to be leveraging endpoints to boost incident response capabilities. Please give a very warm round of applause to Francisco and Mauro.
Okay, hi everybody. How many of you belong to blue teams in here? Okay, few. I think pen testers are predominating in this room. So the main talk about this it's gonna be to boost all the blue teamers in here, and if you have some interactions with the red teams, pen tests, in some exercises, we'll give you some tricks on how to catch them. But apart from that, the thing is that we come more from the real world. Now I'll explain a little bit. So I'm Francisco Galean, he's Mauro. Now he'll introduce himself. I'm currently leading the incident response team in the UK, but quite heavily engaged in the whole Europe. The last year, I've basically been leading two of the biggest data breach and card data breaches that have gone public. So we'll try to bring all of this know-how and expertise to this talk.
Can I? Yeah, okay. I'm Mauro Silva. My current role is SOC Cyber Analytics Lead, which is a really uninteresting role name, but it's basically I play with the data we have on our SIEM, on our proxies, pretty much anything I can get my hands on, and I try to find new ways to catch malicious behavior. And that's about it, really.
Okay, basically, motivation for this talk. We want to show you a whole attack scenario, like the full cycle. Maybe you have heard about the full cycle for incident response, which would just have preparation, detection, response itself, containment, remediation, and lessons learned. And basically what we've seen in most of the talks that we go on conferences, people just focuses in one part, like, okay, let's do this cool attack, or we'll show you this really cool technique from the engineering point of view. We want to help the blue teams like to see like a full use case from the very beginning. What are the goals of the attacker? How can you respond with sort of events? Can you grab from an incident and forensic side of it? And then from an engineering point of view, how can you bring stuff together without paying millions to other vendors? Which you definitely can, but okay, let's try to help out as well the small and medium-sized companies. And what about detection? Once you do all of this engineering, regardless if it's more open source or you are integrating tools, what you can do with that. For this talk, we've basically gathered real use cases that we've been just tracking threat groups, financial threat groups and APT groups that they are using it at the beginning of their intrusions. And the key point in here is to understand that it's not that once you breach in, it's done, which most of the pen tests are like this because companies don't tend to like to allow pen testers to do post-intrusion scenarios, but attackers, that's what they do. So it's good to a little bit understand how this starts with very basic and useful approaches. And then let's see what you can do with that. So let's begin with the attack. Let's put this scenario, which very common, phishing to a normal user. Why would it refer by normal user? So an employee that doesn't have any privileged account. On that document, there's an embedded macro that's going to spawn a PowerShell code, and it's going to download and execute a tool used to query Active Directory. Oh, but usually when you embed stuff in macros, it's to download malware. Who has heard about Emotet infections or things like this? Oh, we are going to stay with something that it's been used by pretty much every infrastructure, every organization that uses a Microsoft Windows environment. you're going to have administrators for that infrastructure, right? And they're going to make use of tools that you can actually query the Active Directory. Later we will explain a little bit Active Directory. But you have to keep in mind that attackers, that's going to be the first thing they do. And it's just been happening with different tools, but that's the first thing they do. We'll explain a little bit why they do that. Basically, I always like to explain the customers, okay, what can you tell me about your crown jewels regarding infrastructure, regarding data? So if you have Windows infrastructure, the first thing that they will say is, hey, domain controller. That's like one done crown jewel for sure. In terms of data, sometimes it takes longer than to answer where do they have their most precious asset, right? But let's keep in mind domain controllers. For sure, if an attacker gets domain admin, it's the key for any intrusion goal. Okay, as I said before, the attacker is not going to finish when they are domain admin, which is most of the time the pen testers. They get domain admin, end of the story, report, and next pen test, right? How many of you have found yourself in that situation? I don't believe you. Who knows someone that was? Anyway, basically what we see is that whenever the attackers get domain admin, that's their first stage of the intrusion, because they have a goal and they want to meet that goal. And it's going to take a few hours, going to take a few days to get domain admin, but if you are, let's say, a large organization, usually it's not that difficult. But that's just only the beginning. But how do they achieve that? Active Directory. There is definitely a huge amount of information that maybe you're not even aware of that you can retrieve with just any single employee account, okay? To get to the domain controller, you need highest privileges in a Windows environment. But how do you do this, the privilege escalation? You may be thinking, oh, exploitation. Well, that may be from time to time, but that's way simpler than that. You can actually escalate privileges by retrieving the information from that Active Directory. Like who is logged on where, who has admin rights where, who is domain admin, who is domain about these particular servers. By the way, help desk. In your organizations, help desk, which sort of privileges do they have? Because they usually have to connect to your laptops or the normal employee laptops to fix the stuff, right? So we would say, okay, at least there are admins, local admins, to the employee desktops. But it also comes in handy that a help desk can just fix some stuff on server side, right? You would say, oh no, that's bad practice. That's never happened. Well, you just check on your own organization what happens, and you will tell me, but I already give you the answer. Most of them, you can just traverse from a normal workstation laptop to some server. Good. Wouldn't it be interesting if I just managed to just get access to any single laptop, because that's the weakest point of the most organizations. Just get access to a laptop, regardless of the privileges that I have. What can I do from that? Okay, if I'm not domain admin, I cannot be jumping from here and there, right? No, I cannot. And what I can retrieve? We're not going to explain something new that has already been presented in different talks, Black Hat, DEF CON, and that's not the purpose of this talk, as we mentioned. But let's explain a little bit Active Directory, more like from an end user point of view. So every normal employee, what is Active Directory for them? So we start with this user. I really like the human resource users because their day-to-day is to open PDFs and Word documents. So yeah, they're quite an attractive target. And they do open whatever they receive most of the times, okay? Let's assume that. So I would like to understand this user. If I get into that user, what can I do? Which are the connections that I have? Okay, that's the manager. Maybe I want to understand member of which groups. And these groups, which sort of access do they have? Do they have access to some particular data, to some particular files? And from here, what if I can start jumping and understand where do I find like a privileged account? For example, is this connection a more privileged account? That would be interesting, right? Because if you're on the blue team, usually all your monitoring is based on high alerts, because you usually are flooded by tons of alerts that you're just not going to check, and maybe you're just going to check the high and the critical. But if you're doing something without privileged accounts, without any malware, what are you going to check? Are you that good to get into the level of every single endpoint to understand what's going on? Maybe yes, probably not. So in order to better explain this, we've just done a replica on our lab, and we've picked a tool called Bloodhound that was presented in Black Hat. Why this one? Because they did an amazing work on the visualization of it. To be honest, that's not the tool that we've seen used by the threat groups out there. They've used other ones that are freely available. So in the end, the goal is the same. We just want to make it easier to understand. And it looks pretty. So yeah, really great job. So let me explain you. That's our lab, and basically we executed that use case that we mentioned before, okay? A phishing with some Word document, and in the end, executing an Active Directory tool. The result is that it's just a CSV file, JSON file, so it's a text file. Again, no malware at all, okay? And it's really easy, trivial to just get this data out. If you were able to get in, and by get in, it's as simple as going to black market, buy some credentials. Where do you have your VPN entry? Where do you have your Citrix? Citrix, yeah. If you have Citrix in your organizations, do a check. What are you monitoring in there? Because they are using it a lot, like a lot. It's the main entry point for the good threat groups. And sometimes we found both financial threat groups, APT groups, reusing the same entry point but doing different stuff. So let me explain. Once you retrieve this data file, you import it in this really cool tool, Bloodhound, and you get a graph. What's this graph showing? Okay, first of all, it's showing from a normal user. I've executed. I understand that this user belongs to a particular group. There are some other users, like in here, and there are some workstations or servers, right? So to me, the goal is, if I'm a normal user, how can I get domain admin to own the infrastructure and start moving around? Because in the end, my goal is not to be domain admin. My goal is to steal your data. If you have credit cards in POS terminals, running in memory, in clear text, anywhere in your infrastructure, I'm just going to go and get that. But to do that, I need to move freely through your infrastructure. So that's why I need domain admin. It's not that I need domain admin because it's fun to have. No, it's because it's going to help me to achieve my goal. Okay, funny thing about this. From a normal user, you just can retrieve the information. Who is domain admin? I can get that information. And in Bloodhound, you have a query that says, give me domain admins. Oh, okay. There's a user called administrator. You all right? Okay. At least I know administrator is domain admin. What else can I get? Well, now that I know administrator is the domain admin, why don't I retrieve more information about administrator? So administrator belongs to different groups. and has some connections to some particular workstations, endpoints. Question, wouldn't it be cool to find a way that from here I can find a path to administrator? That would be interesting. Any ideas? Well, what about if I retrieve the sessions, for example, the active sessions? What about if I just retrieve all the scripts that are running in your GPO? Wait, putting passwords in plain text never happens, right? Let me tell you one thing, it happens a lot of times. And you just can retrieve every single script in the shared folders and just looking for passwords in clear text. And that's real life. That's what is happening right now. But that's one. The other, if check, for example, you just land in a user that it already has local admin. So it's not a high privileged user, but you are already local admin of some particular privileges. That's going to be way easier. And it's going to allow me to understand this administrator where it has sessions. So there's at workstation Y, and it's admin about that server. Oh, that server is a domain controller. So I want that, right? So, okay, but once you have this, what do you do about it? Well, then it's time for the pen testers to answer, because you'll probably know what you can do with that. I don't even have to explain mimic ads, WCEs of the wall, and start jumping from one place to the other if you want to start grabbing credentials. The thing is that you already have the knowledge, enough knowledge, to understand what you have to do to achieve domain admin. And as I said, the goal of this talk is not to explain how do all of these techniques, but it's quite easy. On average, you can get it from few hours to 2 days. Most of the times, that's what we've found during the incident response and investigation, when we were getting to the root cause of analysis. It's like, okay, it didn't took too long for them to achieve domain admin. But that's the beginning of everything. Then they stayed for months in your infrastructure, and that only took few hours or couple of days. Now, okay, we've seen the beginning of an attack without any malware, so that's probably not going to trigger a lot of alerts in your typical tools. But from a response point of view, which are the logs that are going to help you? Again, that's nothing really fancy or new, but most of the times people forget about the raw events. Why? Because let's imagine that you start in a SOC. They've just bought real expensive stuff in there, and you just get alerts, and you just read the alerts. But you don't even understand maybe where these alerts are generated from. And if you don't see what you don't know, how can you ask for more logs to be onboarded, for example? Are you seeing the right thing? You have enough visibility? So the concept of threat hunting. I like this picture because it's like, oh, what is a threat hunter? It's slightly different from a pen tester. Threat hunter really wants to understand the environment, really wants to understand the context of that infrastructure. If one server is running a very important database, it's different than if it's running a development machine, for example. Why? Because the data, the crown jewel in terms of data may be in one part rather than the other. You want to understand, do I have enough visibility about this server or this other? Between servers, do I have any visibility at all? If there's something spawning on a particular server, can I see it? Or I just have perimeter login, and I know that no one is going to get into my infrastructure because they've bought these expensive firewalls and we are secure. Well, if you don't see anything what's going on between your servers, that's really cool. The attacker is just gonna have good fun. But okay, let's go to the basics. You have a lot of stuff going on from an endpoint point of view that you don't even need to pay for any tool. You just can generate these logs and events. Okay, you just need to understand that. You just need to know that this is in there. And I said this is nothing new, but what we see in a lot of organizations is that the new people joining blue teams, they are already losing that knowledge because they just rely on the tools. So in the end, you will ask them, okay, do you have visibility in this on this? I don't know. Ask my tool. No, I'm asking you because if you are on board in the lock or not. So by default, for example, by default on Windows, this is disabled. A new process has been created. Why this is important? You'll say, oh, but I have a lot of endpoints on my infrastructure. That's going to be very noisy. Yeah, and then you're going to spend a lot of money and something else, and you will have it in there. But if you're a threat hunter, if you're a blue team, you want to understand what has been executed in there. That's the first rule. Later, you have funky stuff like scheduled task created, user account was created. So they come from the Windows event logs, and they are splitted by sources like security, system, application, Windows PowerShell. About Windows PowerShell, by default, if you're running Windows PowerShell, like PowerShell version 2, you're not going to have pretty much anything. But if you start installing version 4, version 5, you're going to have a lot of information in here. Basically, what has been executed and other funky stuff. But again, if you don't try to understand your infrastructure, you'll probably see nothing. OK, so we run this, and it's like, OK, if I'm just giving it to an incident responder, what can I get just from the raw logs? If I'm retrieving, let's say, the event logs, what can I see? OK, I can see something like this. On a timeline, first, it was executed Outlook. There were more other things in here, and then we see WinWord, and then we see PowerShell. Later on, we see adquery.exe on a different path, right? And has this triggered the antivirus? No, this has not triggered anything, because that's not malicious by itself, right? And the other thing you can tell me, oh, but how do I know that all of this is related? Well, I can tell you because that's what we do, having this knowledge and understanding this. But what if you engineer it and make it easier, and it just has context that it's easier to follow up, right? So that's the whole concept of doing the engineering and then all the detection. But first, it's always good to understand the raw logs, what you are onboarding in your toolset. And last night on the dinner, we were having a chat, and there was this night discussion about some memory injection and some attacks. And I asked, what about the blue teams? What do they have to analyze to detect this? And the red team, the pentest guy, said, I don't care. It's not my job. And so what's the point of the exercise? I can guarantee you that the blue team, if it's not like a really mature blue team, they're not going to have the answer. So you're going to achieve your goal, but the blue team is going to be blind. What's the point of that? So you need to understand how can you retrieve the logs? How can you get visibility to then apply detection? By the way, another example in here is the PowerShell execution in the event logs as well. But here, it's with the version 5. With version 5, you have all what was executed, which basically it's downloading a binary from internet and executing it. And it can be executed straight away to memory to bypass disk, if that would be malware, for example. And the whole point is, can we get full correlation of the different processes that we've seen in here with the PowerShell execution? Because in here, we actually can see AD query and PowerShell. But what about the rest? Can we get that as well and be like more easily consumed by the blue teams so they can actually enforce their monitoring? So I'll give it to Mauro to explain that.
All right. Yeah, you can hear me. So let's talk about engineering. So like Javi just said, like once you know what the attackers are doing, you want to see them do it and hopefully try to stop them before they get to anything interesting. So that's where the engineering comes from. So we wanted to show you guys how you could get some of those logs, some of those endpoint logs, without breaking your bank. So first of all, there's three ways, well, two really, that you can retrieve the data. Either you have an agent installed on your machine, or you have some kind of central collector that connects to your machine and gets the logs from there. Now, the reason why I say two is because Windows Event Forwarding is a bit of both, really. So Windows Event Forwarding is something that's already built into any Windows and can act both as an agent that sends information out or as a collector that logs into each machine and gets the collection, the event, sorry. Now, the reason why I put no monolith there is I learned this the hard way. You don't want to have, even if you have like a really expensive, awesome seam, anything like ArcSight seam, and ArcSight's not awesome, so don't even quote me on that. But if you have something expensive that you think, right now, this is like the best thing ever, there will come a day where you will want to get that out. Because technologies change, that's normal. And if you put all your log collection, log parsing, and correlation with the same vendor, that's gonna be hard. So if you can, just try to abstract each of those layers. There's a lot of open source. You have like FileBits and other collectors like that. You have stuff like Logstash and Xlog. A lot of open source stuff that can get the logs out, and only put the actual seam vendor collectors higher up in your chain. Because then, if you need to change seams, it's pretty much changing, what, 2, 3, maybe a bit more if you have bigger infrastructures. You change a couple of collectors and done. You changed seams. If you want to add another seam, then if all of your infrastructure is based on, what did that change? Wait. If you have another, if everything's parsing to JSON, then switching between seams is really easy. Now, WEF is the cheapest agent ever because, like I said, it's built into Windows. And it has a lot of pros. So it's native to Windows. You can use the AD to actually configure what is logging and where it's sending the logs to. There's one of the configurations on the AD, which is the subscription manager, that you give it a URL for one or more subscription managers, and they just talk. And you haven't installed anything. You didn't have to talk to the IT people, which can be difficult sometimes, to get anything deployed on the system, nothing. And once you want to change what the system is logging, just enable and disable logging on the AD for that specific thing you want to enable or disable. Done. You can do all of that without ever touching the actual machines, which is cool. Now, that also gives you what I was talking about, a centralized location to install your seam collectors. When I say centralized, obviously, if you have a network with like thousands of machines, you don't want one collector, because that's not going to work properly. It's going to be 5 days between, 5-day delay between the log comes in and you actually see it on your seam. Now, there's a few problems with Windows Event Forwarding. It can't really monitor files. There's some tricks to do it. That's why I said, it can. If you want to, let's say you want to ingest something like the pfirewall log from Windows, then you can have a PowerShell script that's parsing, well, not parsing, but like extracting each line, converting that into a Windows log, and that will be shipped out. It's cheating, I know, and not very pretty. So that's why I said, basically, it can't monitor files. And it can't even monitor for all. If you want to monitor for everything Windows is generating, it's going to crash. It's going to die horribly, and you're going to be like, why am I not receiving any logs? Well, it can't handle it. So most of the times, you need to have a structure, a strategy to actually collect those. The good part is that strategy is centralized. So if you want to change it, guess what? It's really easy. So this is pretty much how you configure windows at an AD level on a group policy to actually forward those events. So you go to the administrative templates, Windows components, event forwarding, and you configure a target subscription manager. You give it one or more subscription managers, and from that moment on, when the machines, the Windows machines update the GP, they're going to start talking to your subscription manager. And then on your subscription managers, you can generate new subscriptions, which can be collector initiated or source computer initiated, which is basically the push-pull strategy. Most of the times you probably want the source initiated for several reasons. First, you don't have one server connecting to everything, because then you need to have that server have permissions on everything. Probably not something you want to do. And besides, it needs to be initiated by the collector. It's way better if the source just goes, wait, I have a new event. There you go. So it's easy. Now, there on the select events is where you do the collection strategy. It's where you apply your filters to say what each of those Windows machines needs to send out to the collector. Now, we're going to talk mainly about 2 events of interest. Obviously, there are others, but these ones, if you don't have them enabled in your AD, you really should. And one of them is the audit process creation. So basically, any process that starts, it's going to generate a new event. And the other one related to that is the include command line in process creation events. That is something that a lot of people forget or don't even know exists. I've seen some companies that have the first one, so you see CMD pop up, and you're like, oh, cool. What did they try to run? No idea. Good luck. If you have the include command line in process creation, then you're going to see the CMD and all the arguments that went with it. The other one is, like Javi was saying, turning on the PowerShell logging. You have module logging, which can be really noisy, and you have the script execution, which is a little bit less noisy. Then you have, like you said, for PowerShell 5 and stuff like that, you also have the script block audit policy or something like that. Can't remember the name exactly. But basically, you see every single command that was generated on PowerShell. That's going to be a lot noisy. Something like Mimikatz, for example, it's going to generate so much. It's something, I was reading about it, something like 65,000 events or something like that from one command. So yeah, that's going to be a bit painful, and you might not want to do that everywhere. But these ones, they are slightly noisy, but you can filter out most of it when you're onboarding stuff. If you did what I said, like of layering out your log ingestion, then you can filter out before it even reaches your SIEM. Because if it's stuff that you already know about, then it's like, I don't care. It's, okay, Office is not a good example because you want to know if Office is spawning for exploits and stuff like that. But if it's an executable that you know, something that's doing telemetry on your network or something like that, that you know it's there, you don't care about it, then just whitelist it. Now, the detection part. Like I said, we're logging every single process creation, every single PowerShell call or PowerShell spawning of instance spawning. Aren't you going to be overrun with events? Well, yes and no. Yes, if you try to see them all. But guess what? Just because you're logging it, you don't actually need to look at everything. You can have alerts based on some specific criteria that seems a bit dodgy. So we have process spawning. We have a new process ID, new process name, and a creator process ID. Okay, what can we do with that? Well, we can start off by correlating those, because again, you got a creator process ID, but you have no idea what that process was. But if you have every single spawn that ever existed on that system, you can correlate it and get what the process name was that created that. So that's what I'm doing there, and this, I'm sorry to say, this is really bad projector, because you probably can't read much of that. But basically what it's doing there, it's correlating the process ID between different events to find the parent of the previous event. Now, don't do the same mistake I did the first time I did this, where I was trying to correlate process IDs, but I forgot there's a lot of machines on the system. So suddenly I see like weird shit spawning PowerShell, or PowerShell spawning stuff that didn't really make sense. And I'm like, what? Okay, I'm pretty sure that never happened. And then I start looking and I'm like, oh, I'm correlating different hosts. That's why. So yeah, have that in mind and correlate process IDs within the same machine. That's probably useful. So if we do that, on the workstation where we performed that attack, you're going to see Windward spawning PowerShell. And actually, this I filtered just for PowerShell, but you would actually see the whole chain. So Outlook spawning Windward, Windward spawning PowerShell, and then PowerShell spawning ID query. But here, basically, I'm more interested in, is an Office document ever spawning anything that it really shouldn't, like PowerShell? There may be a reason why your sysadmins did a document that spawns a PowerShell, but honestly, if that was the case, just fire them and get rid of that document, because that's dodgy. So once we have that, we can create a rule for it. So this is, we're using Splunk for our analysis, but this would work on pretty much any scene. This is how you'd create, and again, I can't read much, but this is how you'd create an alert on Splunk. And you'd get something like that. Windward spawned PowerShell. That's something that your SOC people will be able to understand and will likely know that's a bad thing.
So basically,
Go for it.
that's the answer of the previous slide where we just had, go back here. This one, that's basically the answer to this. So how can we make this easily to the people that's monitoring, that you don't have to spend time understanding that this already looks malicious, although if you have experience, you may already see that that pattern, it's not good. So you can actually create this alert in a very easable, consumable way. And that's the whole idea of how you can even do that particular alert, which is quite simple. But in the end, it's a high fidelity alert. That's the important thing. To avoid false positives, we try to build the high fidelity indicators that we want to follow and investigate.
Yeah, exactly. So even though you can have pretty much any correlation you want, you can see every single process and what that process spawned and stuff like that. What you want to focus on is something that should never or very rarely happen. Stuff like Office spawning other programs, like PowerShell. You don't want that to happen, because that will just mean, and when I say PowerShell, it can be malware.exe or something like that. You never want to see that. So if you focus on those sources that typically will never generate a new process, then you can already catch a lot of malicious stuff. Sorry, just checking time. All right, cool. So we also have PowerShell logging. What can we do with that? Because you know PowerShell is everywhere. You're going to have thousands of PowerShell logs, because your admins are using that pretty much every day. So how can you differentiate between what's bad and what's good? Well, one example is that. So detecting suspicious ratios of uppercase and lowercase. Because, yeah, your admin guys might use PowerShell a lot, but I will guarantee they won't do like capital G, lowercase e, capital T, dash, lowercase whatever. They're not going to be changing all those, because why would they? But malware, to evade detection, does. They do stuff like that. So lowercase n, uppercase E and W, and then lowercase o, b, and then uppercase j. They do that to try to avoid detection, but you can use that to actually detect them. So that's what I'm doing here. Basically, I'm getting the message, so where the whole command from PowerShell is written to in the case of the event log. I'm parsing out basically all the lowercase characters, all the uppercase characters, and all the characters. I'm counting them and checking the ratio between uppercase and lowercase. Well, in this case, this is a emotet running. And emotet running generates a ratio of 0.87. That means for every 100 lowercase characters, you have 87 uppercase. That's not very likely to happen on your normal sysadmin stuff. You might get a 20s, then 30s, but 87? No. That won't happen on your normal day-to-day usage. So once you have that, again, you can create an easy-to-read alert message for your people. You have PowerShell command with a normal upper to lowercase ratio, number, on message, message, on host, something. Easy. They know where it is. They know what the command was. So immediately, just looking at this, they can kind of rule out, even if your sysadmins do something really weird, but that looks normal for their kind of work, then on that message, you can immediately see, well, yeah, that doesn't seem very harmful, so just ignore it. But if you see something like that, I hope my team doesn't ignore it. And that's about it. Any questions?
No, cool. Yeah.
Hi, so my question would be, why do you spend precious resources to correlate process IDs when you can use tools, for example, like Sysmon?
True, true. But that's why I said, like, that means you're not changing at all the endpoints. You're not touching the endpoints. Everything is already built into the endpoints. Because trust me, when you go talk to IT people and you say, can I install something on your machine, please? They're gonna be like, no. And you're like, oh, come on, it's for security. It's really good for you. And they're like, yeah, no.
We want to roll out a new tool to 10,000 laptops.
Yeah,
Nope.
exactly. Exactly. And same goes for EDR. If you're thinking about Sysmon, why not an EDR tool? First, because most of the people deploy really expensive EDR tools, and we're trying to make something that you can work with without spending a lot of money. And second, because again, it's going to be another agent, another thing that you need to deploy to machines, and you're going to have some pushback here.
But if you manage to get Sysmon deployed, or you manage to have EDR, that's going to be always better for the blue team. So
yeah. If your company paid for that and your sysadmins allowed you to do that,
go for it.
Yeah, your
Definitely.
manager, well, the upper management told them you really need to let them install that. Awesome, good for you, but that is not the case in a lot of companies.
Further questions. Don't let these two guys get off the hook that easily. Yeah. Got a question? Yeah. That's the spirit.
So thank you very much for the talk, very cool. Two small things. First of all, yeah, the clean information is very important, of course, to understand what they're doing. So first of all, we have to require that, right? But how many times is that really activated, and how many times is not when you have to maybe find something interesting after it happened, yeah? So that's a common issue. And the second one is, it can be, I've seen multiple cases where it can be even completely overwritten. So the CLI part of the event in the Windows event log is completely overwritten by the attacker. So how would you tackle these situations? Yeah?
First of all, there's a lot of a lot of times people are using stuff like syslog to forward data to ArcSight or whatever. Syslog has a far smaller limit than Windows event logs. If you forward the whole Windows event log, it's gonna be a while before they actually reach the limit of not being able to log. I think the event log limit is something like 32K or something like that. It's gonna be a while. You need to write a lot of stuff to actually get that command basically cut in the middle. If you're using syslog, it doesn't take that long. No, then, yeah. Then what were you talking about? Sorry.
Let me get you the microphone again. Easier. Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't want to say about truncation.
I'll go for it.
2 points. One is that it gets completely overwritten by the attacker, so he's masquerading what he's executing.
So on that one, first of all, it's not the normal thing. Because they'll first go and try to clear the logs. Then was company
Right, there is already trace. Yeah.
Yeah, because then what you're talking, there was a company that discovered the way of doing that, but it's not the common thing. The common thing is to clear the logs. But then to avoid this, if you're already sending them when they are being generated, the ones that you want, like the security system, then you'll have it in your centralized solution. So, okay, they've cleared the logs, good for you, because you have another high fidelity alert. Yeah. So that's
other is
really
that
cool.
it is a pre-requirement to have the CLI setting activated, CLI audit setting activated, otherwise, yeah. But unfortunately, in most situations, is not the case. That's what I was asking.
Yeah,
And
that's why I said having those enabled is really important.
And regarding syslog, it can be set to not truncate, so expand the.
As far as I know, syslog has a limit which is far less than a Windows event log limit. It might have changed. I'm not saying it hasn't, but as far as I know, it has a limit. Of course, if you're talking about new technologies, you can do like syslog ng and rsyslog sending stuff to Kafka instead of using the actual syslog format. And well, if you're using that, then probably you get around some of the limits. But most of the times, Windows event log can handle a lot more than syslog. And I'm a Linux guy, so I'm not advocating for Windows, but in this case, they actually made something useful.
Any further questions? You all want to get to your coffee.
Oh, and before I forget, you were talking about also the attackers try to encapsulate or hide their commands. When you have PowerShell tracing, that doesn't matter, because there will have to be one command that decapsulates or de-encrypts or whatever to run that command. And when the final command gets run, you're going to see it.
Well, thank you again very much, Francisco and Mauro. Thank you very much. Yes.